Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Crystal Boyce, and I serve as a compliance manager for the contract compliance section within the Compliance and Grants Administration team. On behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome you to today's Pay or Play Technical Assistance Training. Whether you're joining us as a prime contractor, a subcontractor, or subrecipient, we appreciate your participation and your commitment to understanding the program requirements. Before we begin the pay or play portion of today's training, I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleagues for their presentation. Lakeisha provided an overview of the pre-award process and compliance requirements, and Andreas covered the city's MWSBE program and its important participation requirements. Thank you both for your time and your expertise and the support you provide to our contractors, subrecipients, and project teams. Today's presentation combines information for both contractors and subrecipients. While some requirements apply differently depending on your agreement type, we'll identify those distinctions throughout the presentation. The purpose of today's session is to provide practical guidance on the POP program, explain compliance expectation, review recent updates, and answer any questions you may have. Our goal is to help ensure everyone understands the requirements from the beginning of the project to help avoid compliance findings, payment delays, and any other issues later in the process. This session is intended to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions as we go or save them for our question and answer session at the end. Feel free to also include those in the chat. We do have representatives that will be in the chat looking forward to assist you. We appreciate the work each of you does in helping the city deliver quality projects and services to our communities. We look forward to partnering with you throughout the compliance process. With that, let's transition into the Pay or Play program and get started. Today's discussion topics will include an overview, definitions, specific program requirements, submission in B2G, and final POP compliance review, as well as our frequently asked questions and answers, and information about additional resources that are available to you. For those of you who may not be familiar with Pay or Play is a program that was implemented by the Office of Business Opportunity in an effort to level the playing fields for prospects and contractors who provide health care benefits to their employees versus those that do not. Here we'll talk about a few program definitions so that you can make sure you have a good understanding of what's considered, various program language and things that you'll hear on POP applicable program regularly. A covered contract. So for those of you who are working on a City of Houston project and you are wondering if your project is subject to comply with Pay or Play requirements. For any contracts that are $100,000 or more, you will be required to adhere to Pay or Play requirements. Those are for the big contracts, so those overall totals, that is for the prime contractor. So as long as your project or your contract is valued more than $100,000 as a prime contractor, you will be subject to adhere to Pay or Play requirements. For the subcontractors that are performing on the project, for any project that's in excess of $200,000, you also will be subject to comply with Pay or Play requirements, okay? And that is for professional service, construction, and any type of service type projects. You will be expected to adhere to Pay or Play requirements. Executive Order 1 through 7 outlines this information, and I definitely encourage you to review that so that you can have a better understanding of the purpose of the program and any type of rules and requirements that's related to those. Subcontracts that start below $200,000 but later may reach or exceed those thresholds will also be subject to adhere to those requirements from the time of that $200,000 threshold being met. So you definitely want to make sure you pay close attention to those payment totals. B2G is a good source to review that information. I'm sure that the contractors, the prime contractors, and the subcontractors work well together to say updated with that information, but it's also good for you to track that. And so if you receive any type of additional awards on contracts that put you over those threshold requirements, you want to definitely make sure that you begin adhering to those requirements from that time going forward. Pay or play does not apply to supply only or procurement contracts that have 51% or more of supplies being afforded on that project. Pay or play also doesn't apply to intergovernmental contract agreements or those interlocal agreements or bulk purchasing projects. Any contract for which the City of Houston has not expended funds, regardless of the funding type. I have received questions lately in regards to POP 4 waivers. You want to make sure, if you feel as if your contract is exempt from adhering to POP requirements, you want to make sure that you get that POP 4 waiver submitted to our office so that the Office of Business Opportunity is made aware for review and approval. However, this information must be submitted for review and approval prior to any award going to council. If you submit the POP 4 waiver after the project has gone to council, we won't be able to proceed with granting that request, and you will be expected to adhere to the pay or play option, okay? Contractors that utilize self-employed, owner-operators, or 1099 independent contractors are POP exempt, but what you want to do is make sure that you communicate that with your POP administrator so that we can make sure that you've provided the appropriate information so that that information can get reviewed and approved by your POP administrator and the Office of Business Opportunity as applicable. Covered employees. And so this is now we're starting to get into the requirements that will let you know who should be receiving the pay or play benefit. And so one term that you'll hear frequently when we discuss POP requirements is a covered employee. And so all employees of a covered contractor, and remember we mentioned the $100,000 for the prime and the $200,000 threshold for those subcontractors. A subcontractor and a prime contractor that meet those threshold requirements are considered a covered contractor, okay? And those covered contractors have covered employees. The covered employees are subject to receive benefits under the pay or play rules, okay? And so what is considered a covered employee? A covered employee is an employee who works for a covered contractor and is 18 years of age or older and works at least 30 hours per week for a covered contractor and works any amount of time on a covered contract, okay? All active employees, including exempt staff working on city projects, must be listed on the workforce employee list in B2G. That's very important. Sometimes I get questions about if an employee is considered a covered employee if they're part-time. No, they're not, but you definitely want to make sure that you retain any supporting documents in case we have questions or if we're auditing. We want to be able to produce that information. Pre-construction meetings, and so we're talking about construction on this side. And so if you're working on any construction related projects, you want to make sure that you get those initial documents in a timely manner, okay? And so that would be the POP 1, the POP 2, and the POP 3 form, along with the B2G access form, a conflict of interest form, and start of work notice, along with any POP 8 waiver request. And so the POP 1 through 3 form, I often, share that they're kind of self-explanatory. With the POP 1 form, you want to acknowledge for the prime and the subcontractors, this is a requirement for both. You want to make sure that whoever is responsible for ensuring the compliance of the POP program requirements, you want to make sure that we have on record that they've acknowledged that this project is subject to compliance with pay or play requirements, okay? The POP 2 form, which is the certification of compliance, is basically a form that will detail if you're going to pay or play. It also gives information about the number of covered employees or employees that you have total on the project, okay? And so not difficult forms at all to complete. It just asks a little basic information about the number of employees on the project and how many covered employees do you estimate will be on the project, okay? The POP 3 form, this is a form that lists all of the subcontractors that you expect or intend to, that you intend will be performing on the project. This is required for the prime contractor as well as the subcontractors if you have any lower tier subcontractors that will be performing under you. Okay, the access form is very important. The access form includes the contact information of the individual that will be responsible for entering the POP compliance records in B2G. Now, B2G only allows one contact. However, I know that there may be several individuals assisting with these requirements, and so you can feel free to share your access if you feel comfortable with that, but there can only be one designated person in B2G for that user role for POP requirements. And so you want to make sure that whoever that person is included on that POP access form. Conflict of interest disclosure form. I know my colleagues mentioned this. This is one of the shared documents that you will see if you're working on the project that's also subject to MWSBE and other requirements, but you want to make sure that you have on file a conflict of interest disclosure form, okay? And that will be for all businesses and subcontractors. What we want to make sure is that there's not any potential conflicts. And I like to give you a good example. What you do not want is for you to get granted $1 million contract or whatever the amount is, and we review the information and see that there's a possible conflict, and the city has to take that check back from you. And so I'm sure that will be a good indicator and reminder for you to make sure that you are submitting the conflict of interest form as soon as you are made aware of your interest in performing on these projects, and especially, following the pre-construction meeting, these will be some of those initial documents that will be required. Start of work notice. I'd like to explain the start of work notice as being very important, because when we have to report this information to auditors, the auditors come, and when they look at supporting records and they want to know, why are we requiring this information, or how do you know these contractors are performing on the project? One of the supporting records that we use is that start of work notice. And so I don't want to request documents from you if you haven't started on the project. And that's more understandable because we work on various type of projects. We have all different type of projects. And so I understand that there's some trades that won't start into the latter part of the project. So I don't want to withhold your payment and say that you're non-compliant if you're not even going to perform until years down the line. And so you just want to make sure that you get those start of work notices in as soon as possible. And you want to also make sure that you give us the best, to your knowledge, estimated date of your start of work, especially if it's a to be determined date. You can provide as much information as possible, and you can also communicate that with whoever your POP administrator is. So we can add that to any file notes, okay? POP waiver request, it's very important. You want to make sure that you are submitting those in a timely manner. You also want to make sure that those POP 8 waiver requests are submitted directly to your POP administrator. Yes, I do love seeing when you submit those documents in B2G. That's what we like to see. However, if we haven't reviewed that information and you've submitted that POP 8 waiver request that requires immediate attention, you want to make sure that we get eyes on those as soon as possible. So if you have any POP 8 waiver requests, you want to get those sent directly to your contract administrator instead of uploading it in LCP Tracker or into B2G. You can do both, but we just want to make sure we get eyes on it as soon as possible. I know for me, those emails come faster, and I'm not telling you to email all of your compliance documents. I'm saying for those POP 8 waiver requests, because we have to review that information, and we also have to send that information over to the Office of Business Opportunity for final approval. So you definitely want to make sure that you remember that in regards to a POP 8 request, a POP 8 waiver request. Now, you might not have any waiver requests for any of your covered employees. However, if you do, please make sure that you get those over to us in a timely manner so we can get those processed. All contractors, remember we're talking about construction related activity, all contractors will be given access to LCP Tracker after the pre-construction meeting, and all require and will be required to upload their POP 1 through 3 forms and their POP documents into the LCP Tracker specific designated folders. Contractors are required to begin complying with POP requirements within 30 days of your start of work notice. So make sure that those start of work notice, as I mentioned to you all, are as accurate as possible, because we'll use that to determine when we need to start sending those, missing documents or, document due reminders and things like that. Public service agreements and subrecipients. This information is slightly different from the construction activities. These are for our subrecipients. These are for our public service projects. If you don't have a public service project, these are usually our nonprofits, okay? And so if you're not a nonprofit, this is just good information that you can have. So if you ever decide to switch over from construction to public service projects, you'll already be ahead and you will know what will be expected. So yes, you will be required to submit the initial forms, the POP 1 and the 2 form. The POP 3 form we typically say is not applicable because usually on our public service projects, we don't see subcontractors. However, recently I found a project that had a few subcontractors. So I just don't want to put a blanket statement out and say it's not applicable, the POP 3 form. I want to make sure that you're clear. If you have any subcontractors that are performing on a public service agreement project, you want to make sure that we get that POP 3 form. If we don't get a POP 3 form and I'm audited and the auditors want to know why don't we see that in the file, I will be able to explain, and our procedures will explain that it's not applicable, and we'll be able to show them in B2G now that there are no subcontractors on that project. And that's the reason, because it is a form that captures the subcontractors' information. And so remember, for public service projects, if you do not have any lower tier subcontractors performing on the project, this form is not applicable. I do not mind if you send it and put NA on the form. I don't mind if you complete the form and you put NA where it says list subcontractors. Whatever works best for you is great. I just want to make sure that you're aware that if you don't have any subcontractors, simply including or entering not applicable is fine, okay? You won't be dinged if we don't have a POP 3 form on file for you as a subrecipient. B2G access form, remember, it's just as I mentioned for the construction activities, it's required, and we want to make sure that you include whoever the point of contact will be for POP compliance purposes. Conflict of interest disclosure form, I know maybe during the pre-award you all submit that to your public service relations managers. However, I try not to trouble them. And so I want to make sure that we have it on file. So when those auditors come, we have our records to show that you are in good standing and you are eligible to perform on these projects. And so make sure that you get those conflict of interest forms completed and submitted over to us. Start of work notice, very important. We want to know when you started on the project, okay? We want to also make sure that we're not requesting information before you've actually started. And so it actually helps you. I know you don't want to get all of those reminders. We have those tickler alerts and B2G. And so it's very important that you all get those initial documents to us, okay? The POP 8 waiver requests, remember, these are very important. We want to get those submitted over to the Office of Business Opportunity in a timely manner. And so make sure if you have any of those covered employees who you feel may be exempt, that you get that POP 8 waiver request submitted to us as soon as possible so we can get that sent over to the Office of Business Opportunity for final approval. That form does require you to have a notary completed as well and sign off on it. So make sure that it's completed to its entirety. Okay, as I mentioned, the POP 3 form, again, is not required on public service agreements if you don't have any subcontractors. Those initial documents, this is one of the distinctions from construction to public service agreements. For those initial documents, you don't have access to LCP Tracker, right? Your projects are usually much smaller in time frame. And so what we do is on these particular subrecipient agreements, we allow you to submit those initial documents via email to your POP administrator. However, your ongoing compliance workforce audits on a quarterly or weekly basis does require for it to be uploaded in B2G. So just those initial documents, because we know before you include and add all your workforce employees and emails and things like that, and those employees in B2G, that you may not be familiar or you may not have access to do that. So we want to make sure there's no delay with project activities. So we do allow you to submit those initial documents to your POP administrator. We'll get those uploaded in B2G on your behalf. But remember, this is only for those subrecipient public service agreements, okay? And that's your initial documents like your POP 1, 2, and 3 form, your conflict of interest, things like that. I'd like for you to be able to send those over to us as soon as possible so we can get you processed in the system. Something that I really like and I want to encourage too, when you send those conflict of interest forms, sometimes I know you compile all your forms together. I know that's very helpful when you're uploading it into B2G, especially for those quarterly documents. We appreciate that. But for those conflict of interest forms, because there's additional information or additional steps that's required on those conflict of interest forms. And so if you can upload those separately, especially when you're submitting them to us. And so it's just easier because we have to download them, we have to sign, we have to review, we have to upload them in another system. And so it just helps us save a few steps from us having to extract them from your other documents. And so if possible, if you remember the conflict of interest forms, if you can submit that as a separate attachment, that will be very great. We would greatly appreciate that. Remember, workforce compliance documents must be uploaded in B2G. You want to make sure that those quarterly and weekly required documents are uploaded into B2G. Please do not send those to any emails, okay? And for POP cover entities, you must begin reporting those requirements within 30 days of your start of work notice, okay? Now here are pictures of the actual documents. So the documents that I mentioned to you, the POP 2 and the POP 3 form, here is an example of what the POP 2 form looks like. And this form is required for the prime and subcontractors and for subrecipients. This is information that tells us initially how you want to pay or play. Or you can do both. We do have some contractors sometimes that elect to do both, which is absolutely fine. And so this is one of those initial documents. We just want to get an indicator of if you will be paying or playing or doing both. And it also gives you information about the estimated number of contractors or employees that will be performing with you, okay? And so as much information as you are aware of during this initial phase, please provide that to us. We review that information and kind of compare that to the information that you upload into B2G. And so, for an example, the total employees working on the city project and the total covered, the total non-covered, and exempt employees. And so this will be a good indicator to us. It gives us an idea of how much activity will be on the project, and we can share that information. We can also look in B2G when you upload your workforce employee list and make sure that you did it correctly, okay? Also, it helps me if you have exempt employees, it'll inform me that I should be expecting to receive POP 8 waiver requests from you, okay? The POP 3 form. Remember, this form is required by the prime and sub. However, for public services, remember public service agreements, if you don't have any subcontractors, you can simply put NA or admit that from your submissions, okay? This is the participating subcontractor form. And so we basically want to know up front what subcontractors will be performing on the project. I expect you all to, as a prime contractor and subcontractors for lower tier firms, we expect you all to discuss this information prior to us having those pre-construction meetings and those post-award meetings so that they're not coming in blindsided, right? And so we expect that you all have your hurdles, or before you execute any agreements, we expect you all to discuss information regarding the POP requirements. And so that means that they're aware that they're going to be subject to comply with the POP requirements, of course, if their contracts meet those threshold requirements. And this is where you will include this information all about the subcontractors that will be performing on the project. This also gives us information that we can use for auditing and reporting purposes to share about, how many contractors will be performing on the project, and if they will pay, play, or both. It also gives us their contact information. Remember, we mentioned the conflict of interest form, very, very important. This is the form that is required for contractors. And so make sure that you're submitting the appropriate form. There's now additional forms that's required. And the additional form is just basically one for contractors and one for subrecipients. And so if you're a business entity, if you're working on a construction related project, this will be the form that you submit. You see where it's highlighted, it says completed by business entities. You want to make sure that that's the form that you're using, okay? Also, you want to make sure that it's completed to its entirety. It's fillable. So you don't have to worry about writing in using your manuscript. You can actually fill this information in so it's legible. So when the auditors come, we can present this information, okay? Make sure that you're signing off. Make sure that you're completing each required field, okay? I've had questions recently about what's the program? Well, if you look in that drop down where it says program, it'll give you single family, multi-family, public service, every type of program area division that we have. And so you're going to have a little bit of information about the projects that you're working on. Hopefully you ask questions and not just sign agreements, and so that you know this information. The funding source, that's typically when, like CDBG, or if it's DR, disaster funds, or if it's home related, or if it's HOPWA. And so if you don't have that information, talk to whoever you execute an agreement with. They can give you that information, okay? Make sure you're completing with the address and all of the contact information. And if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. But this is one of the required forms, and this is something that's included as a federal requirement. And so when those auditors come, they do review your project file records, and they do confirm and make sure that we have completed forms by every active participant on those projects. And they make sure that we've done our due diligence in reviewing that information and signing and approving that there's no conflict. Now, here's the conflict of interest form for non-federal entities. And so this is the form that you will see or be required to submit if you are a subrecipient. So make sure if you accidentally get a hold of the business form and you are a subrecipient, to request the non-federal entity form, okay? As I mentioned, you want to make sure that it's completed entirely, right? Usually you see your different type of funding for that one being like HOPWA for your subrecipients, or CDBG, or various type of funding, but you can confirm that before you enter into an agreement, or you can simply ask your POP administrator, okay? Now we're going to get into the fun stuff, the POP program requirements. Okay, so now you have a contract working with the City of Houston, and you've read those terms, and the details say that you will be subject to comply with the City of Houston's pay or play requirement if you are a covered contractor. Remember the 100,000 and the 200,000? So you will be required to select or elect if you're going to pay or play, okay? If you choose the pay option, Pay means that you're going to pay $1 per regular hour worked for your covered employees. It does not apply to overtime. It's for your regular 40-hour work week employees, for those covered employees. And if you're going to pay, you're going to pay $1 per regular hour performed on the project. In B2G, you will be able to go in and enter this information on a weekly basis, just like you do your certified payroll or whatever labor system that you use. On a weekly basis, we expect you, if you select the pay option, to go into the system on a weekly basis. What you'll be entering is very simple. It's 2 columns, and I'll be able to show you that in the following slides. It's 2 columns. You have one that says total hours performed for that particular company, and then you have another column that says hours worked specifically on that City of Houston contract. Okay? Very simple. You'll do that for each of those covered employees if you choose the pay option. Okay? Those monthly invoices are generated on a monthly basis, and you will have 30 business days from the date of receiving that invoice to pay that invoice. All of the payments are made through the paymental system and must be paid in full. Partial payments are not accepted. Okay? Verification. We do review certified payrolls and timesheets. So if you're working on the project and it's subject to Davis-Bacon requirements, those certified payrolls will get reviewed, and we will compare that information to make sure the information that you're reporting for your workforce audits, for the pay submissions, match the information that you reported on those certified payrolls. If you're not working on a project that's subject to Davis-Bacon requirements, we will review your timesheets. And so when you upload those records on a weekly basis, you should also be uploading with that information regarding your labor records. And so whatever system that you use, we want to be able to verify that. And when those auditors come, they want to be able to review and support the information that you submitted in the system. We want to make sure that they can review that information to see how we came to approve that. So make sure that you have supporting records for any information that you submit to our office. Pay requirements further explained. So here are some examples, okay? John is a covered employee who is not offered POP benefits. The employer must submit weekly pay submissions by entering John's total hours and hours worked into B2G under the workforce audit list every week. Okay, so you see what that scenario is. He's a covered employee and he is not offered POP benefits. That means we're going to automatically put him under the pay submissions, okay? John is a covered employee and has insurance through his spouse. That's absolutely fine. The employer should submit a completed and notarized POP 8 form with proof of healthcare insurance for John via email to the POP coordinator for review and approval. Okay? Here's another scenario. John is a covered employee and accepts the POP benefits offered to him. Okay? John will be considered a play employee, not a pay employee, and hours are not required to be submitted. Okay? So if he's offered coverage, that's play. That's what we like to see. That's the purpose of the program. The program is to help offset costs. It is to cover these employees on these projects that are working on these very important projects. We want to make sure that they're able also to take advantage of healthcare coverage. Okay? If you do not want to elect the play option, remember you can always elect pay, absolutely fine, one or the other, or you can do both. You can have some employees that you're providing the pay option to, and you can have some employees that you're providing the play option to. It's absolutely fine. Okay? How to submit pay total and work hours. Remember I told you how it's going to look? This is what you'll see in B2G if you elect the pay option. So remember that $1 per regular hour worked on the City of Houston project for those covered employees. You see the total hours column. You're going to put the total hours they worked on the project. Even if they worked less than 40 hours a week, you want to enter that information in, okay? Next, what you'll do is enter the total amount of hours worked specifically on that City of Houston project. So first column is the total hours they worked for your company, right? Because we know that they could have worked on, all over the world. That's fine. We just want to know how many total hours they worked and how many hours they worked specifically for that City of Houston project. The hours worked will be what you'll be billed for. Okay? Play. Healthcare requirements for the POP program. If you elect the play option, you will actually provide health benefits, which is what we strongly encourage. However, there are requirements for meeting this rule. The employer will pay at least 75% of the monthly premium. The employee pays no more than 25% of the premium, if that, right? And so what you'll notice is if we see on your initial documents that you have submitted the information to play, we may send you over the play eligibility verification form. And what that form is basically you giving us the breakdown of percentages. We also have an Excel spreadsheet, so you don't have to try to configure 75 and 25. It does it for you. And we just want to make sure before we start too far in the process that we have already approved and reviewed the information for how you'll be paying for those employer benefits. We want to make sure that you are actually eligible, okay? And we want to make sure that you're meeting those minimum requirements. And so remember, if you choose the play option, the employer will contribute at least 75% of the monthly premium, and the employee will pay no more than 25% of the monthly premium, if that, okay? Important notes. If requirements are not met, the contractor will be classified as a pay employee, okay? You will classify those covered employees, they'll be classified as pay, and you will be classified as a pay contractor. So it's very important. You don't want to start, messing up early on, because we're going to bill you. And until we can get it corrected, you're going to be responsible for that invoice bill, okay? HCD may request verification documents. Remember, I mentioned that employee verification information. Insurance cards are not accepted as proof of coverage for quarterly submissions. I've been reviewing information, and submitting compliance status reports, getting those sent out, and I do still see insurance cards. Absolutely fine if that's what you want to submit, as well as the other required documents, but you must make sure that you submit the appropriate information so that we can determine that your covered employees are actively performing on a project, are actively receiving those coverage benefits, okay? What's not required? Play contractors and subcontractors do not have to enter weekly workforce hours, okay? Remember, if you're choosing the play option, you don't have to worry about the weekly submissions. You don't have to worry about the total hours and the hours worked. You'll be required to do quarterly submissions. The quarterly submission schedule. I've recently had a question from contractors about, for an example, the deadline for the second quarter is July 31st. We get submissions starting July 1, and we absolutely love it, right? Because you know that the period is from April to June for the second quarter, for example. So you don't have to wait till the 31st to submit that. You should already have that information prepared. We really, really like when we get that information submitted, at the earliest possible phase, so we can start reviewing that information for approval, okay? The quarter one is due by April the 30th. If you have any past due records, if you have not submitted your information for quarter one, you want to get those in, because it could potentially result in payment withholding, because that would be considered outstanding non-compliance. The next quarter, quarter three, will be from months July through September, will be due by October the 31st. The fourth quarter, October through December, would be due by January the 31st. So you want to keep these on your calendar, keep them as reminders, whatever you need to do, just make sure they're submitted by the due date. The sooner you have that submitted, it's absolutely fine. We just want to make sure before that next report card is sent out, your compliance status report, that we have the most updated information. The Play quarterly workforce submissions, you will upload the POP7 form. Remember, what's required if you do the Play option on a quarterly basis, you're going to start your combined document with the POP7 form. We want to see that first. We want to see the list of all of those covered employees that you have in your employee list in B2G. So we're going to compare that information. So you want to make sure that we have that POP7 form. That POP7 form is required on a quarterly basis. It'll include the employees that are covered that are performing on a project. There also are fields for the employer contribution and the employee contribution. You should already have that information. It also asks about policy information like the ID number and things like that. Whatever you have to provide us, please enter that into that form for auditing and reporting purposes. Well, you'll also be required, if you choose the Play option on a quarterly basis, you'll have to give us those supporting records. So the insurance summary and invoice. That insurance summary must include every covered employee that we see in the B2G system. Now, I know that you have employees that work all over the world. I don't care about those particular employees for the City of Houston project, okay? Respectfully. We only are concerned about those covered employees that are performing specifically on the City of Houston project, right? So sometimes we get documents, and I mean 400-page documents. We don't need all that information, right? It's very helpful, and I really appreciate when you all highlight those employees specifically that are performing on the City of Houston project that's subject to pay or play requirements, okay? And so remember, if you're going to choose the play option, you want to make sure that you have the insurance summary as well as that insurance invoice. Another thing that I recently saw when I was reviewing some records for a play submission is you want to make sure that those submissions cover the periods. And so I've had to reject some for submitting, for an example, it's Q2. So I'm looking from April through June, but on their invoice, it only shows May. What about April and June? So you want to make sure if they send you monthly statements, that means just, send that page where it shows that the coverage was active for each of those months when you upload those summaries and those invoices. Okay? Coverage detail, like I said, is for all 3 months of that reporting period. So if I reject it, don't send us an email asking why it's rejected because you did exactly what we told you to do. You want to make sure that when you look at that coverage period, that you're reporting information for each month, okay? All documents must be uploaded into B2G now for audit to be considered complete, okay? Remember, do not submit to us via email any of the recurring compliance documents that's required on a quarterly or weekly basis, okay? Those documents must be submitted through B2G now. How to submit play quarterly submissions? You'll go into B2G and you will select that particular project that you're performing on, and you will, I'm assuming you've already gone into the system and added those employees in, just like you see on the screen, and then you'll go to manage those crafts, okay? You uploaded for all of those employees, each of the employees, but I'm gonna look at, if you have all play submissions, I'm gonna look at that play information that you submit for those play employees, and I'm sure it'll be the exact same information, your POP 7, your summary, and your invoice, and I'll be able to mark you as compliant on your compliance status report once I'm able to confirm that information has been submitted. This is what the POP 7 form looks like, but what you want to make sure is that you include the start and end dates. You want to make sure that you include the insurance ID number because this would be considered as incomplete. I want to know what the benefit period is, the start and the end date. I want to know that when I'm reviewing this information on a quarterly basis, that those employees are still covered and active. Usually, for example, with my City of Houston insurance, they cover us annually, right? And so every year you can make changes to it. So typically, whenever you know that the employee started with the company, is usually on an annual basis. So don't think too hard about that. Put the start date and put the end date. It's usually, an annual verification or annual insurance rule. And so they're not changing it every month or sending them new insurance cards every month. It's usually for a year. So it's absolutely fine if the start date, is the same and the end date is the same. We just want to make sure that for the period that we're reviewing, that they're still active. Yes, it may be the same for each quarter because it's usually insurance is annual, okay? So don't overthink that. The ID number, I guess that may be why you all still like to send those ID cards because that's where you get that information from. Feel free to include that in so that it's not rejected as incomplete. The POP 8 employee waiver request, remember we talked about that exemption, and so if you have any covered employees that you feel as if they should be exempt, the following reasons include if they're under the age of 18, they have health care coverage through their spouse, or they decline the health care coverage from the city that you're offering, but you want to make sure that you have supporting documentation for that, okay? And you also want to make sure that that form is notarized. The POP 8 waiver request form requires a notary to sign off to make sure that it's complete before you send it over to us and the Office of Business Opportunity for approval. We will reject it if it's not completed entirely. Okay, the POP 8 exemptions are valid for 1 year. So after that annual period, you will be required to resubmit that to our office. Okay, make sure that any proof of coverage is required. If you have a covered employee that says they have coverage through their spouse or through Medicaid or Medicare, proof is required. And so along with that POP 8 form that's completed, you'll also show us proof. Proof can be the insurance card in those instances, okay? If the employee declines, you want to make sure that you keep that communication in writing. You want to make sure that you've sent over, to your POP administrator where you shared and offered it to that employee, and they have verbally and in writing that or however it works for your company that they decline it. Okay. Here is what a completed POP 8 waiver request form looks like. You want to make sure that it's completed entirely. We will reject if it's not completed to its entirety. One thing that I typically see, if it's not notarized, it'll either not have what you offered that employee. You want to make sure whatever coverage you offer in regards to the employer contribution and the employee contribution, you want to make sure that you enter those amounts in, okay? The POP 9 form, we typically don't just share this information because it's not something that's highly, that contractors seek often. But if you do or would like to have more information about the self-insured contractor information, the POP 9 form, feel free to ask your POP administrator and we'll get that information over to you. It's available upon request. It's basically saying that, you cover everything for your employees. You pay, if they have a claim, you pay those claims. And so that's not, a coverage that we typically see. However, feel free to inquire more if you have questions about that. Also, with the POP 9's form, they do remain valid for a period of 1 year from date. So you must submit those annually for reapproval. POP submissions in B2G. Okay, so now we're going to actually go through step by step. So you'll be able to see what your screens will look like when you go to B2G for the submissions. And so if you're not familiar with B2G, B2G is our contract management system. We use that for most of all of our programs, but this is the system that Pay or Play uses to track Pay or Play compliance. And so if you're not familiar with it, you want to make sure that you get added as a user for your company, if possible. If not, you want to make sure that there's an access form on file for somebody from your company, whoever is designated as that POP liaison for compliance purposes, okay? And so the B2G management system is where you'll access all of these tabs that I'll be talking about. It's where you'll upload those quarterly play submissions. It's also where you'll go in and enter those weekly workforce audits, okay? And you'll be able to use this system to take you to your invoices, and it'll also take you to the Momentus system, okay? This is what we'll be looking. These are the steps and the requirements that we'll be reviewing in B2G, okay? Adding employees into B2G, remember that's very important because that's the first step. There's no way that you can enter hours in if you are a pay employee or a play vendor, a play contractor, if you don't have the employees listed. There's no way that you can submit quarterly play submissions for covered employees if those employees are not added. And so after you do those initial documents, one of the first steps you'll do in B2G is adding those employees in, those covered employees, all of the employees that perform on your project for the city of Houston, exempt or non-exempt, okay? We'll also show you about filling in those weekly hourly audits, saving and certifying those audits. That's very important. And so you want to make sure that you also are familiar with the process for uploading those attachments in the system. Remember, I mentioned to you about the supporting records. And so I'll show you where you can upload those documents. Okay, so here's what you see when you log into B2G. Okay, you see contracts on the side, you should have a dashboard and it'll show you the total number of contracts. We have contractors that work on that has several active projects. Congratulations. However, we want to make sure that you're specifically looking at one project at a time for those compliance submissions, okay? So you want to select contracts and it should take you to the actual contract that you're looking for. All right, you see where it'll say contractor and it'll show you the name of the contract. This is what it should look like on your end. Maybe it looks slightly different, but you get the picture. We want you to go to contracts and we want to make sure that you're selecting the appropriate contract. All right, manage employees. This is how you're going to add those employees to the project. And so you want to make sure for each of your employees that are performing on the project, exempt or non-exempt, you want to make sure that you're adding those employees into the system, put as much information as possible. It doesn't ask for confidential information. And so you just put, you know, when they started with the company, their name, if they're going to pay or play, if they're active, simple things like that. Okay. You want to also make sure that you are assigning them to the project. So this is a continuous of how you add the employee. Okay, remember I told you it's just basic information. The social security number, it's a field for that, but it's not a required field. And so you can share as much information as possible. However, we want to just make sure that this employee is still active or not active. We want to know their position, you know, their craft, things like that. You want to also make sure you save this information. So after each entry, make sure that you're saving it. Next, you'll assign the employee to the contract. And so you want to make sure that you're assigning them. You want to make sure that you're selecting if they're going to be a pay or play employee. And that's where you will assign the employee. So once first you're going to add, then you assign them. Don't forget, those are two different steps. This is what it looks like when you're assigning them to that particular contract. Okay, you want to make sure that you are assigning them to the correct contractor, because you know you can have lots of subcontractors. You want to make sure that they're being assigned to the appropriate contractor. Okay, because that will be the contractor that's required to report for that particular employee. Now we're going to go to the pay, the weekly submissions. Remember, if you choose to pay that $1 per regular hour performed on the project for those covered employees, you're going to be required to go into the system on a weekly basis. And you're going to be required to add the audit in. So I get calls sometimes and say, I can't add it in. You said I'm out of compliance, but I can't add it in. Well, it's because you need to add the audit. So you'll see it's weekly, right? And so every week, if it doesn't automatically populate, depends on how your project is set up, you'll be expected to just simply select add audit. You'll add that audit to the to your weekly list, and you'll go in and enter that information in for that week. Okay. If there's weeks of no work performed, there is an option for you to add the audit and just select no work performed. But don't let it lapse and you haven't gone in on a weekly basis, and then we go in and review that information and see all of that red and it's incomplete. That's a problem, and that will get your payment withheld. And that won't only get your payment withheld, that'll get the entire project payment withheld. So don't you be that contractor who is so busy being outstanding in the field that you forget that there's requirements on the project on a weekly basis if you choose the pay option. So make sure you also have somebody in the office, or make sure that you fit time in your schedule to go in and enter this information on a weekly basis. It's much easier to be in compliance from the jump. So by the time the project finishes, we can get it closed out. We can get your retainage payments to you if that's the case, and we can get the project closed out satisfactory. This is what I remember I said incomplete. Right? You want to make sure that you are going in on a weekly basis and adding that information in, those details. That invoice is going to be generated on a monthly basis. So you have to go in on a weekly basis to enter that information. Even if there's no work, you want to make sure that you go in and enter that, because we can't go in and certify and review that information until you submit it. What I don't like is when you as when you have, those special contractors, they won't respond to an email for months and months and months. And then when it's time for the payment to be released, they want to add months and months and months of work in the system and all those workforce audits. Okay, so I want you to know, as long as it took you to put that information in the system, it might take us even longer to review that, because we don't have we can't give you any special privileges. So we up front, we're being honest and open. We want you to, make sure you be mindful of our time. We try to be mindful of your time. So make sure that you're entering that information in a timely manner so that we can review that information and notify the appropriate parties that you all are in compliance on the project. There is a such thing as having a bad apple. So if you're encouraging contractors to perform on City of Houston projects, make sure they understand if they're working on the housing and community development projects, that we mean business, and we make sure that the information is submitted is accurate. We do verify the information that you're entering into that system. We want to make sure also that you understand that any information you send over to us, make sure you have supporting records. Any information that you submit can be subject to review and audit. Okay? Once you finish with entering the total hours and the hours performed on that project, you're going to go in and select field that audit, or remember I told you can mark it as no work. It's simple. It's not difficult at all. You'll go in and enter that information, select those tabs. It's under the workforce audits. I get calls all the time saying, I don't see it. My screen doesn't work. I don't have access. Yes, you do. Click workforce audit list at the top. Okay. That's where you'll be able to see all that good information, right? And you'll fill in the audit if there was work performed, or you will select no work performed, okay? Remember we talked about those two columns? That's what it looks like. It's very important that you save and you certify that the information that you've entered is accurate, right? Because we're generating invoices on these documents for pay. So you want to make sure that it's nobody that can come back and say we did anything fraudulent or we did something incorrect. We don't like to play. We want to make sure if you pay that you have the supporting records, and you make sure to the best of your ability and your understanding that the information you entered is accurate. Remember, we trust you, but we're going to verify that information. And so you make sure that any information that you report, you have supporting records for that information that's readily available. All right, remember what I told you about? If you are working on a project that's subject to Davis-Bacon requirement and they're submitting payrolls, certified payrolls in LCP tracker, remember that's absolutely fine, because we have access to go and verify that information. We work very, very close with the Davis-Bacon team. They're our best good friends. And if we have any questions about anything you report, they'll definitely give us those details as well. But if you're working on a project, for an example, like the subrecipient contractors, or or it's the single family. I mean, it varies, right? And they don't use as the payroll reporting system. Absolutely fine, right? Whatever labor system that you use to report those hours in your workforce, labor workforce hours, we need that. We need you to submit that. You see where it says attach file? That's where you're going to attach that file, okay? And so you're going to attach those records. And so remember what I mentioned to you about we have those very special, outstanding contractors that they'll submit 400-page documents, right? Don't do that. We only want to see for those particular projects, those employees that perform on those City of Houston projects. You can redact the information, or you can simply highlight it. We just want to make sure that the information that you're entering to our system is audit ready, okay? We want to make sure when those auditors come and they want to know, they reported that covered employee only worked 2 hours, or that covered employee only worked 30 hours or 40 hours. Okay, absolutely fine. We trust you, but we're going to verify. We're going to go look at those payrolls, because your payroll shouldn't say that he worked 40 hours a week, but in B2G, for your pay submissions, you put he only worked 5 hours. So you got to make it make sense, okay? We want to make sure that, we can report this information out to the auditors, and we want to make sure that we stay audit ready for testing. I told you, certified payrolls and timesheets. Remember, non-DBRA projects, whatever you use, send us those timesheets that supports the information that you entered for that week. For DBRA related projects, if you utilize LCP Tracker on those City of Houston projects, we have access to that. We can review those records. But if not, we will be expecting you to upload whatever timesheets that you use to track the information that you reported in the system. Play quarterly submissions. I'm going to show you what it looks like to actually enter that information in. Okay. So remember, we talked about the workforce employee list at the top. That's one of the big major first steps. You'll go to manage the crafts. You'll enter all of those employees in that are performing on the project. Remember where I told you about, uploading and attaching those documents? Remember I told you that POP 7 form, your invoice summary, and that invoice? This is where you can upload that information, okay, on a quarterly basis. This is what it looks like. You can upload separate tabs. You can combine it all as one. I don't mind. I'll still review it all. Whatever works best for you to maintain compliance, submit it in the system. Those quarterly documents, here it is again, workforce craft review. That's where you'll upload those documents for all of those play cover contractors. Okay. This is what it looks like. You want to make sure that you're saving that information in the system. Okay. Make sure that you're saving it. You can even go back and review it to make sure it's entered in the system. I understand how the system works sometimes. There could be a glitch. You know how B2G can be at times. It's absolutely fine. But we're going to hold you to it. We're going to make sure that you're reviewing the information, saving it, and confirming that it's uploaded in the system. You'll even get a confirmation that it's saved, and you'll get that little green particular box that'll pop up once you've saved it in the system. Okay, this is what it'll look like on our end when I'm reviewing it. Okay, and so it tells me the date that you entered it in. It also tells me what you labeled it. I really appreciate when the contractors are very detailed, and so it'll have POP 7 form for Q2 2026, or it'll have insurance summary for Q2 2026. It should read like a book. And when the auditors come, they have access to these systems. When the Office of Business Opportunity audits us, they have access to this system. So they shouldn't have to come ask us any additional information if you're doing it correctly, right? It should read and flow like a book. Okay. Now, this is the report card that I mentioned. So on a monthly basis, we submit to you all, to the prime contractor, compliance status report. And hopefully the prime contractor or the subrecipient is sharing this information if they have subcontractors with you all. And so this is what you want it to look like. You want it to show all this green and no red, right? When there's red, there's a problem. Okay? If you see a red X, that means that it hasn't been submitted. If you see, for an example, under the invoice status, if you chose the pay option, this means that there's some outstanding invoices. The corrective actions, that's what you should go to. Go to the corrective action. It's going to tell you everything we need to fix the problem. Okay? All those initial documents I mentioned to you, that's so important, that's here, right? But you know what I didn't mention is the termination of work. So just as important it is for you all to submit that start of work, it's very important for you all to submit that termination of work notice too, because I don't want to bill you and I don't want to be sending reminder notifications saying you are out of compliance and you haven't submitted work, in your documents in a year, and you've actually not even performing on the project anymore. So just make sure you keep us in the loop. We help you, you help us. Okay. Final POP compliance review. Okay, remember, all of those POP forms need to be submitted in a timely manner. The POP 1, the POP 2, the POP 3 form as applicable. You want to make sure that that POP 8, the POP 9, those forms that require it to be notarized, you want to make sure that you're sending those documents to us in a timely manner. Send them directly to your POP administrator so there's no delays if you send it in LCP tracker and B2G, okay? Start of work notice and termination of work notice. Remember, I told you how important those are. The play quarterly workforce submissions, if you choose the play option, we'll talk on a quarterly basis. On a monthly basis, I may send you an email and say, good work, keep up the good job, okay? For the pay weekly workforce audits, on a weekly basis, we should be able to look in the system and see that you're staying updated with entering those weekly workforce audits in, along with that supporting documentation. Okay, invoice completions, from the day you submit the invoices, from the day you receive those invoices to the system, you'll have 30 days from that day. So you may see on that report card where it'll have a invoice unpaid. That's fine as long as it's not red, because remember, you have 30 days to submit it. So we may just put that invoice on there, but it's not red, right? Because we know that means that it hasn't been 30 days. Any additional information, letters of explanation, check stub, notarized statements, whatever you need, make sure you're sending that directly to your POP administrator, okay? Failure to meet those requirements, any of those requirements, if it's considered substantially non-compliant, we do have the leverage to withhold your payment, and that's for construction and public service projects. And so I think that, everyone likes to get paid. Everyone wants to get paid in a timely manner. And we also want to make sure that when we are tested for how great we do on these projects, our greatness is very dependent on the timely submissions and your compliance with these programs. So help us help you. Frequently asked questions and answers. All right, so let's see if you all have been listening. Are only employees working on the job site required to be listed on the workforce audit employee list? No. Remember, all employees who work on the city contract, whether on-site or in office, must be included in the workforce audit employee list and accounted for during the audit. My employee has his or her own insurance and my company does not pay for it. Does this mean he or she must submit a notarized POP 8 form for exemption? Yes. You must submit a completed and notarized POP 8 form along with proof of health care insurance. This is the only time a copy of an employee's insurance card will be accepted. Email the form along with the insurance card to your POP administrator for review and approval. I am a subcontractor on the City of Houston POP contract, and my contract ends before the prime contractor finishes the job. Do I still have to submit POP submissions? No. Please upload your termination of work notice in LCP tracker or submit that in B2G now with your date your contract is completed, and then submit your final in B2G database during your final workforce audit week. Very important. In B2G, you do have the ability to go in and put final workforce audit or final payment received. You do have the ability to do that. Are subcontractors required to comply with the POP program if they are not MWSBE or Section 3? Absolutely. There's no relation. Yes, all subcontractors with a professional service, construction, or general service contractor or public service who has a contract amount that meets or exceeds the $200,000 threshold is required to comply with POP requirements. Do any of the POP workforce invoice payments benefit my company? Absolutely not. No. Those paid $1 per regular hours that are worked on the City of Houston contract goes into this big, large contractor responsibility fund, but not to worry. It helps provide insurance and health care throughout the City of Houston to services and uninsured persons in the Houston area. Additional resources. Okay, so you can go on our website. You can also visit the Office of Business Opportunity website. We have so much good information to help you and your team. we have this PowerPoint presentation. Of course, that's live. We also have guidance manual and reference materials. So if you still need some additional information or assistance, feel free to reach out and use the available resources to you. Are there any comments or questions? All right, well, hopefully there was something said throughout the presentation that sparked your interest even more in working on City of Houston Housing and Community Development Department projects. I know it seems like a lot, but once you start on the project and you upload your first document or enter your first weekly workforce submission, you'll see how simple it is. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm always available. My team is available. We really enjoy what we do, and we want to make sure that you're great, because if you're great, it'll show our greatness as well. Thank you so much for being a part of today's session, and we look forward to working with you on current and future projects.